Hello everybody, nice to see so many people here and lots of friends and people I know, so that's great. My name's Deborah Frost. As Maggie said, I'm the Chief Executive of Personal Group, but I'm really here today to talk about some of the stuff that our business, one of the subsidiaries of Personal Group is a company called Inecto, and we're the largest UK independent reward consultancy. And so we've been doing some really interesting work, and I thought I'd share some thought leadership with you today on some of the ways that the business has been thinking about in terms of using data and using tech, but to put the individual at the heart of your strategy. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Once upon a time, I'm sorry, I'm not going to actually tell you the story. And the problem is that we all love stories, don't we? We use stories, and I will be using some stories through my presentation to illustrate ideas and to give insights and to make it easier to remember and more personal. And you'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to sit here and have graph after graph after graph and slides of data. But the problem is, as we know, with using stories in HR, is that sometimes those stories are not based in fact. And what can happen is that we can make up stories that say, I think people that went to that university tend to be better at this sort of job. Or I think people with the same sort of background as me tend to be better at this sort of role. Or people that do that should be promoted. And so the very simplest bit of analytics, the very simplest bit of work that you can do on data will improve your decision making no end. Now this is my, I can't remember Maggie, probably fourth REBA conference that I've spoken at. And over that time, the number of people in HR using technology to inform their decisions has massively changed. So just hands up, how many of you in the room have got a technology software that helps you analyse data and helps you predict what's going to happen? Yeah, probably half. I think the first time that I spoke here, which was about 3 years ago, I would say there were maybe 1 or 2 people in the room that were using it. So within HR, we've gone so far in the use of technology to aid our decision making. And I just wonder, have we almost gone too far? You know, we're so pleased with ourselves that we've got proper data and we can go into the boardroom and we can say, look at my graphs, look at my data. I'm not relying on gut feel anymore. I've got proper stuff to show you. But have we actually gone so far that we've forgotten that, oh, hang on, I've got a little bit lost on the slides, over there, that we've actually forgotten that the people that we work with, the people that we support, actually have their own stories. So their stories are around things like, you know, do I get paid enough for my job? Sometimes it feels like I'm just a number in this organisation. And one of the roles of HR, I think, is to manage that quite tricky thing between driving around stories that the business wants to talk about. And I'm sure most of you were also listening to Evelyn from Patagonia. Absolutely fascinating. But she talked a lot in themes and stories and purpose. And that's really important to us as an HR community. But how can we make sure that we're using data as well as we can to analyse and drive stuff for the business, but keeping it human? And that's really what I want to talk about with you today. So data and the use of data has had quite a bad press recently. I mean, we're right in the middle of the, sorry, I'm going to say the E word, the election. And it is painful talking every single time you've heard on the radio or the news, they're talking about Facebook, social media, how those sorts of data-driven adverts are making our choices. And as reward and HR professionals, we now hold more data on people in a different way than we ever have. So if you walk outside, you will find companies that will give you data about your employees around the state of their physical health, around the state of their financial health, their mental well-being, and all of that is very different to what we used to have, which used to be someone's NI number and their address. But now we know how they're feeling, how their bodies work, whether they've got debt issues, all sorts of things that I know quite a lot of us in our community are thinking, how are we going to really manage this data? Because it's quite hard for us to manage this data effectively. We need to keep our employees safe. We need to make sure their data is safe. But suddenly there's a lot more responsibility on us. And that is the downside of data. It comes with a lot of responsibility. But at the same time, data is a massive force for good. And if you think about the most individual data, so our own DNA, we're now using that to devise drugs to combat cancer and to intervene in things like cystic fibrosis and those sorts of diseases which really haven't had any serious possibility of changing over people's lifetime. So there's some massive changes that are coming out of good data. And I think we need to recognise that data that is very personalised is here to stay. But using it in a way that humanises and is helpful and insightful is really key. Now, I've got some news for you in the audience who are younger than me. I'm 53. And when I was younger, when I was about 30, I never thought that I would be interested in the things I'm interested in now. So I'm interested in crosswords, Radio 4, and going on long walks in the country. And truly, if someone had said that to me 20 years ago, I'd go, don't be ridiculous. But here I am, at this age, interested in those things. And one of the things that happens when you go on long walks in the country is that you need to take a map with you. And so my husband has joyfully downloaded the Ordnance Survey app. And he's very pleased with that because he's very good at reading Ordnance Survey maps. I'm not so good, I have to be honest. And I really think there's probably going to be someone here from Ordnance Survey in a minute who's going to leap up and attack me for this. But Ordnance Survey is a really good example of using data and digitalising a map in a way that is totally unhelpful. So all they've done is they've essentially taken that data, taken a photograph of it and stuck it online. So it's still very hard to read. You need specialist knowledge to understand it. And also you need to know which way the sun comes up and stuff. It doesn't work for me. Give me Google Maps every time. So Google Map actually isn't a map really, is it? It's a line on your screen. It's not actually a map. But it does tell me really helpful things like what time I'm going to get there. And if I need to go a different way because there's a blockage on the way I would normally go. And I can also personalise it so it tells me things I might want to know, like is there a coffee shop on the way? Where can I park? Where's the theatre? All of those sorts of things that actually makes tech very usable, very personalised for me and very helpful. So if we think about how we could use tech in our business to humanise reward, I guess what I'm saying is think Google Maps rather than Ordnance Survey and think about how you can use tech with you in your interactions with your employees to make it come alive and make it more helpful for people. Where am I doing on time? Okay. Now at Inecto, we do a lot of work on thought leadership. And one of the things that they've been working on, they're not particularly talking about it today, but if you go and find someone from Inecto, they will happily tell you about this, is the employee lifetime value cycle. And to some extent, there's a holy grail here around how can we improve the value that employees have for us over the time that they work with us. So I'll just briefly explain this graph. It's quite a simple graph. I don't think it's that hard to understand. You can see that at the bottom left-hand corner, it says starting blocks, and then there's a sort of dark grey blob in the middle. And the contention is that most companies have a sort of starting position of their employee lifetime value, and they can use data to help them understand what that is. It takes time when you bring someone into an organisation to make them cost effective. So at first, all the money goes to them. So you're spending money on salary on them, on benefits, on pension. You're putting in resource to train them how to do their job. And it takes some time before those individuals can actually start to give you something back in terms of benefit. And then they reach a certain level of performance, but the downside is they become disengaged and their performance falls away before they leave. How about if you could use data to get people faster into your organisation? How about if you could use data to help you understand how you can improve people's performance? What are the interventions that we can make as an HR team that get people more engaged in the business and performing at a higher level for longer? How can we accelerate their pace to high performance and then keep them there, extend their stamina so that whilst they're with us, that continues for longer? Now, in terms of some of the ideas around that, an example might be that you decide that your recruitment process works a lot better if you engage people before they join. So the pre-induction engagement stuff about contacting people when they've accepted an offer and working with you so that when they join, they already have got some idea about what the business is going to be like. How about if you could make sure that you've got A/B testing on which is the best way to train someone in their job? But the fundamental point is that for a lot of businesses, they don't even know what is their starting point. And using data enables you to say, at what point in our organisation is somebody effective in their role? And that means that they're paying us back in reality. We're getting some value from our investment in that individual. And we work with organisations in care homes or in hospitality or in one particular case in a car fitting organisation, where you go and get your exhaust done and things. And they really didn't know how long it took before somebody was fully competent. And if you know that and you can extend that lifetime value, suddenly your employees become much more productive and actually, let's face it, much happier. Because the people that are on the green curve are likely to find their job more interesting, more engaging, they feel prouder of what they're doing than somebody on the dark grey curve. So that's a really good example of how you can use data and analysis in a way that starts to really drive home the benefits of the practices that you've got in HR and really target it for people. One of the things that I talked about at the beginning around storytelling is about us jumping to conclusions and jumping through thoughts. And I expect most of you have read or have heard about Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So what Daniel talks about is that most of us use fast thinking too much. So we jump to conclusions, we see a pattern and we think, yes, I know what that's going to result in. And as I said at the start, that can be around discriminatory things like, I think men tend to make better chief execs. Luckily, my company didn't think that, but often people might think that somewhere deep inside them. But by thinking about statistical analysis and going back to some quite detailed work on how can we make people more effective more quickly, actually, you can really start to use what Daniel talks about is slow thinking, so detailed, analytical, careful thought to improve things. But the problem is that we're not all very good at that. And that's where using technology and not relying on your own professional ability or professional judgment can make a massive difference. And so by using technology to do the slow, the detailed, the hard work thinking, the heavy lifting for you, you can spend much more time on working with people around training and development, around reward, around employee engagement, around things like helping them understand what their career path was. So an example of this might be, if you understood your employees' aspirations around career, as an example, how about if when they get to a certain point in their life cycle, you start to say to them, to move to the next level, these are the sorts of training things you're going to need to think about. And by the way, here's some internal job ads that I'm going to send you because I think you're probably ready for moving into one of those jobs. The heavy lifting has been done for you because a computer program's already identified the key points that those people might be at. And you can get on with the interesting stuff of actually sitting down with people and saying, these are some of the interventions that we can make to improve the life cycle and extend your stamina within the business. In terms of next slide. In terms of how you get there, using analytics to predict outcomes, whilst it might seem quite a dry subject and quite data-laden, and Adam's sitting here in the audience, Adam used to work for Inecto many moons ago, and he was really, really interested in this. And you can sort of sometimes disappear down a rabbit hole because you get so excited about being able to predict things, but it all comes back down to individual people. And it all comes back down to things like understanding what's our cost of recruitment, how long does our average employee stay with us, what's their performance like at the point that they leave us, can we tweak some of those things in order for people to be with us longer and perform higher? And then when they do leave us, the performance doesn't drop off. They either leave the company as an ambassador for the business, or alternatively, they move into a different job within the company. So their performance never drops off, really. They just move on to something else. And so those are the sorts of tactical and practical examples that you can use to drive data in your organisation in a way that makes a lot more sense than what we talked about earlier on about the Ordnance Survey map, which is just very flat. And it doesn't give you insight and it doesn't help you, unlike a Google map that allows you to understand where you're going, what's the timescale for you getting there, and what are the things that you could do on the way that would make your experience more interesting. And thinking about it from our employees' point of view, if we can humanise and personalise their experience to the power of one, then suddenly they get the best of both worlds. You're not relying on stories, you're not relying on judgment, you're not relying on your professional experience. You are using data, but you're using that data in a way that makes the HR function far more effective in working with managers, working with employees directly, and designing programs that allow you to make interventions that make the business more successful. In terms of the experience that we've got at Inecto, the case study that I just gave you is a live case study. We've agreed not to talk about the organisation, but they're very excited about how they can see how they can keep people with them longer which means that they will be performing more and made more productive. But where I'm really excited, I think, is that chance of us being able to create something for employees that makes a difference to them. You know, you can start telling stories about purpose and why the business exists as long as you've got some solid foundation in data. And what I wanted to give you today was that food for thought around how can we make sure that we're using data to make good decisions, but at the same time we're humanising the outputs of that data in a way that makes life better for our employees, our customers, our shareholders, all of the different stakeholders in your business. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, that's great. And just to give you one example of how humans are very, very good at making stories, I'm going to tell you a very short 6-word story. This is allegedly written by Ernest Hemingway. And he was in a cafe and they were in a competition and he said, I can tell you a story in 6 words. The 6 words are for sale, wedding dress, never worn. Now we can all, can't we, immediately extrapolate loads of stories from that, but it just shows how good we are as humans in being able to build something out of something and nothing. And if I ask any of you, you'll all have different versions of what happened in that story. But it's important that we base our decisions in data whilst then humanising and making it appropriate for people and their own personal stories. Thank you very much.